everybody. Welcome to official episode 1 of Tag Your It, presented by the Advocacy Group, where our mission is to build bridges and close gaps. In today's episode, we are so excited to be joined by my friend, none other than Heidi Mitchell. She is a brand and research strategist here at the Advocacy Group, and we're going to have a really amazing conversation with her. So, Heidi, just say hey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're so happy to have you. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of things about how Heidi got to the advocacy group and what advocacy means to her, especially as it pertains to Black history and different things like that. So Heidi, before we delve into that, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, yeah. So I live just outside of Orlando with my family, my husband, and I have two boys, a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old, and a very unruly dog. So I work with you at the advocacy group, and I absolutely love it.
Oh, and we love having you. So I really want to get into your story. I would love to hear in your own words, how would you describe your advocacy? How did you become a part of TAG? How did you get here?
Yeah, I think, I look back like we all kind of do and look and see, like, how did I get to where I am? What are the kind of those steps that at the time maybe you didn't realize they were pointing you in a direction, but when you look back, you can see it. And so I think, like, if I go all the way back to just my childhood, I think about, like, there's so many examples of how I feel like my parents, like, laid a foundation of just being somebody who is empathetic and somebody who's
Mm,
open and somebody who's caring. And so I'm really grateful just for the foundation that they laid in my life. But I think really I kind of came to a crossroads, in my mid 20s. And it's kind of like this perfect storm came in my
mm-hmm.
life with some events like converging at the same time. And so at that point in my life, I was a new mom. I just became a mom for the
Yeah.
first time, which is obviously like a huge paradigm shift and really changes the way that you see the world. And at the same time, my husband was dealing with a really life threatening illness that kind of
Wow.
turned our world upside down and became
Mm-hmm.
like the first time that we had really faced some real adversity, like something that it was like bigger than us. We didn't know how to face it. And so these
Yeah.
things were kind of happening in my life. And changing the way that I thought and the way that I perceived things. And then around that same time, kind of the third event that I think kind of converged and just became
Yeah.
this moment in my life, like a crossroads, was actually the death of Trayvon Martin was
Mm.
hugely impactful for me. So at that point, I had a 1-year-old son. And, being a mom changes
Yeah.
everything, how you see the world.
Everything.
And so I felt like when Trayvon was murdered, I mean, I lived less than an hour from where that happened. So it felt like it was kind of in my backyard. And I had this baby boy, and suddenly it's like everyone you see is a mom's baby, right? And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
so that just became really deeply impactful for me. I was
Yeah.
really devastated, like at the loss of his life and the way that that happened. And really what happened is I noticed that not everybody felt the same way as me. So this had impacted me in such a deep way. Like I was like
Yeah.
losing sleep. I was like not okay, at what had
Yeah.
happened to this young, this teenager. And I kind of noticed that people around me were not having that same response to this event. And so I think from
Wow.
there, that became kind of this catalyst in my life where I was like, what is that about? Why am I
Yeah.
feeling something different that other people who seem to look like me and kind of
Mm-hmm.
be, in the circles that I'm in, maybe aren't responding the same way? And so I think at that point, I just got really curious, like, what is that about? I want to know more about
Mm-hmm.
that.
Wow. Okay. So then what did that transition into for you? Like
Yes.
what did advocacy begin to look like for you in that way?
So I think at first it was a slow burn. It was just opening my eyes and maybe like having curiosity that wasn't there before. It was just asking questions. It became like reading books It became like finding new people to follow on social media, where I was
Mm-hmm.
like, who else is like thinking like this? I need to understand. And
Mm-hmm.
so, really kind of opening myself up to different perspectives and different viewpoints that maybe I hadn't been exposed to before. And I think
Yeah.
that that is kind of how it started, because I really had to get an education at that point. Like, I had to educate myself. So I don't think that, advocacy felt very like outwardly faced at that point. It just felt like, okay, there's a lot that I don't know and understand. So what does that look like for me to kind of start down this road and figure it out?
That's so good. That's so good because I think in today's world, what it really feels like is there's a lot of resistance
Yeah.
to the whole idea of educating. But I love what
Yeah.
you said about having curiosity, because I
Yeah.
think that's really the thing that is so key here at the advocacy group is to say like, listen, the reason why we're lacking empathy is because we don't have any curiosity. There's so many things that are going on in the
Yes.
world today. People are hurting. People's lives are
100%.
really in, these spaces of hurt, but we don't have enough
Yeah.
curiosity to take the time to go and say, okay, are you okay? And how can I better help you?
Yes. Yeah. And what
And
do
it
I
sounds like
not
you did
know
that
about
work.
this?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's such an important question, is just why? Why does this person feel differently than me?
Yeah.
What kind of led them to this place? What led me to this place?
Yep.
Um, just kind of having that openness.
So then here's my question for you, especially in light of, you speaking about how you had to educate yourself. And we know here in the state of Florida, like we've been enduring the battles related to, um, you know, Black history and having exposure to
Yeah.
American history with regard to Black
Yes.
Americans. Like we've
Yeah.
had those discussions of banned books and banned courses and things
Yeah.
like that. There's been a lot of resistance, and my question for you is, why do you think that there's been such resistance to being educated about that?
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time thinking about
Okay.
that, because it just feels very, it feels very different than maybe how I approach things. So I'm like, what
Okay.
is that resistance about? So I
Yeah.
think, honestly, I think so much of it is human nature, that humans tend to go for the path of least resistance. Humans
Mm,
tend to go for comfort. Discomfort is very undesirable to us. And so I think that sometimes, like, taking an honest look at history is extremely uncomfortable. And a lot of
mm,
times, given the choice, we'll just choose comfort. So I really think that's a big part of it, is just like being willing to be uncomfortable. Like, this is real, this happened, and this is actually ugly. And it's not something
yeah.
that we're proud of, but it did happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really, for me, like when it comes to history, it feels like something that's so important is just being able to live in nuance, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think that we just get stuck in these kind of like polarized spaces, but really two things can be true at the same time. And so this is how
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
about history. This is how I teach history to my children. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
the outlook that I carry, is like two things can be true at the same time. So we can say America is a great country and we're thankful for it and we're happy to live here. And we
Mm-hmm.
can also say, and America
Right.
has done some really, really heinous like things against minorities and people of color, and really has like some things in our history that are very, very ugly. And those things are true. One does not
Yeah.
negate the other. And so I
Yep.
think being able to live in that space and just
Yep.
say, it's still my country. Yes, I still am proud. I'm so happy to live here. And also, this is a
Right.
real factor, and this is a thing that happened in the past, and maybe even this is a thing that is happening in the future, that I or in the present, that I need to be aware of. So
Yeah.
I think just embracing that both and is
Yeah.
such a key. And I think that people struggle with that. We all struggle with that, and myself included. And so I feel like that's why there's so much resistance to just learning history and being open to learning it, because it makes you uncomfortable, and it kind of makes you feel like you have to like almost choose a side, whenever the reality
Mm-hmm.
is like there's a lot of truth that exists there. So
Yeah, you make me think about like though, the evolution of a person, right? Like, I think as human beings, we give ourselves the grace and the space to
Yeah.
evolve and get better over time. When you know better, you do better, right? We
Yeah.
learn from our past experiences. And I think what is disappointing about, what you just expressed is it's like, fine, they were working with what they were working with what they had then.
Yeah.
But it's almost like we are choosing to live with rose colored glasses on,
Yeah.
um, and make it seem like
Yes.
it's been this picture of perfection all along. And it's just been in recent years when things are falling apart and we've got to fix it. But the
Yeah.
reality is, no, we're learning more. Let's learn more so that we can do better. So then,
Yes.
in light of it being Black History Month and, the time that you have taken to educate yourself, I'm interested in knowing from your point of view, like, are there any particular, and let's be clear, listen, everybody, Heidi is like my Black history guru, okay? Like, I know my Black history. I took AFAM 101 and 102 African American and African Studies in college, but Heidi knows her stuff. So I'm going to ask you, like, when you think about Black history, and not just Black history, but history, like when you
Yeah.
think about things that cause you to empathize, like what are some moments in history that you would say, hey, like Americans, especially white Americans, all Americans need to know these events
Yeah.
um, in history so that we can be more empathetic, so that we can be more impactful, so that we can have a more centered worldview.
Yeah, I feel like it's important to start at home. And so that's kind of where I started. And that's kind of the history that I'm most familiar with. And even, when we talk about Black history, and you and I were talking earlier, it's actually American history,
Yeah.
like it's American
Mm-hmm.
history. This is our story, the story
Yeah.
of all of us. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's why it's so important to know. But, locally for me, like I live in Central Florida, I'm born and raised in this area. And so I realized there were some important events that I needed to know about, that there was like a gap in my education. One of
Mm-hmm.
those was the case of the Groveland Four, which happened, not far from where I live now, not far from
Mm-mm.
where I grew up. And, I went to public high school, here in the same county where the Groveland Four case happened. And I
Yeah.
didn't learn about it in school, And so
Yeah.
when I became an adult and I uncovered this, this really important case, kind of a landmark case, I was really upset that I hadn't been taught that,
Yeah.
because while it is Black history, like I said, like it's my history too. This is where I grew up.
Yeah.
This is where I'm raising my kids. And so
Yeah.
why didn't I know that this thing happened? And so I think,
Yeah.
starting locally like that is so important. So for me, like that is a vital case for anybody, really anybody in the country, but
Mm-hmm.
especially if you live in Florida, that's a huge one that you should get to know. And then
Yeah.
really another kind of landmark case that happened here in Central Florida is the Ocoee massacre. And a lot of people
Yeah.
don't know about that. And to
Yeah.
this day, that's still the largest voting day incident of violence that we have on record. And so that,
Wow.
again, happened in my backyard, 30 or so
Mm-hmm.
minutes from where I live. And so just
Yeah.
kind of understanding your local history and the impact that
Yeah.
that has on the place that you live, and the impact that that has on the community that you call home and the people that you encounter every day, I think is so important.
Yeah. Just for our listeners, when Heidi's speaking about the Groveland Four, that case is much like the Central Park Five, where these four young men, literally like miles from the area that we reside in,
Yeah.
were accused of raping a white woman, and it was not good for them. And the
Yeah.
case was it was one of Thurgood Marshall's early cases. He came down
Yeah.
to Orlando and he couldn't even stay in this area. He had to go and stay in the greater Orlando area. So it
Yeah.
has some real history to it.
Yeah.
So definitely check out that story as well as the Ocoee massacre. So then, Heidi, what good is it to actually know this information. Like, okay, sure, somebody goes and they
Yeah.
get the history, but especially as a white woman, as a
Yeah.
white man, like, all right, sure, I have this history, but now what can I do with this? Like, what impact can I
Right.
really have by having this information? How can it impact me in my personal, my work life? Like, and then there's so much talk about diversity and stuff too. Like, how does this fit into that, and why does it even matter?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, history gives us context. And it's really hard to kind of operate and exist, I think, in life without context. And so that's what a fuller picture of history gives us. It gives us the full story. And so when you know these things, when you understand kind of the stories that shaped our country, the story that shaped your community, then now you're working with full context of what's happening. And so I think from there, what you can do with that is you can see a different perspective. You can understand things differently. You can ask questions like, okay, I wonder like how that would affect the descendants of these people that this
Mm,
happened to, that
mm-hmm,
oftentimes are still living like nearby, to this area where
mm,
these things happen. So what would the effects of that have been? And I think really like at the end of the day, the thing that you do with these events in this history is you just have empathy, period. Like you just
yep,
understand and open yourself up to say, like, that is a really difficult and really ugly thing. And
yep,
that is not something that I ever want to see repeated. And that
yep,
gives me a fuller story for the people around me for how maybe something that happens in the news today might
yep,
trigger and affect people around me, people at work, people that I'm friends with in a different way than it affects me. So I think
yeah,
the goal of everything for me, I feel like, is just a deeper empathy and
yeah,
caring and understanding, because I think that that's, I mean, so often that's what we're missing. That's the
yeah.
that's the piece, that we
It
need.
is. Yeah, you make me think about one of the things that I feel like I heard a lot from different people was, I'm not black, so I can't, I don't know what that feels like, and
Yeah.
or even like, shoot, for let's even drop color. Let's just talk about
Yeah.
empathy for a moment. I remember I had miscarried. Um,
Mm.
so guys, I had miscarried a few times before we actually gave
Yeah.
birth to our beautiful little twins. But I remember people would say like, oh my gosh, like I've never had a miscarriage before. And so in doing that, they sort of disconnected themselves completely from the
Right.
thing that I was dealing with, when all I needed was somebody to care and to get
Yeah.
in with me. And the people that were able to do that were able to tap into different spaces. Like, I may not have been able to experience, I maybe didn't experience that, but I've lost
Right.
somebody.
Yes.
I've lost somebody, and that pain hurt. And so I
Yeah.
can imagine the pain that you're dealing with by the loss that you experienced. Or
Yes.
maybe my child was marginalized at school. That the
Yeah.
teacher, the kids left my child out, and so that made me feel away. And so I could only imagine how you feel as a mother, like
Right.
that empathy that you just
Yes.
mentioned. I think there are other ways to tap into the empathy than just disconnecting. So I love your whole
Yeah.
idea about, it's really about connecting and empathizing.
Yeah, you don't have to have the exact same experience. I mean, isn't that's nice, right? Whenever we,
Right.
we're going through something and we find somebody who's kind of been through the exact same thing, and that is a special kind of connection that can be made. But that's not the only way to connect through empathy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think so many times whenever people are struggling, somebody will say like, "Oh, I just can't even imagine what you're going through," and usually that doesn't feel very helpful. It's good intentions, but it doesn't feel very helpful. But I think just to um, sit in something with somebody, even if you
Yep.
don't have the exact experience, maybe just to, like you said, find that parallel in your own life.
Yep.
But even if you're like having a hard time making that distinction and that connection, like just to sit in discomfort, I think it's something that we're really bad at, is just sitting in discomfort.
Sitting. Yeah.
And just like as a country, like I don't think we're great at lament. at
Oh, that's good.
sadness. You know, I think we
Yeah.
like to just keep it moving, get on to the next big high and the next kind of success story.
Yeah.
But I've found that like the way that you make impact in other people's lives, the way that people make impact in your life is the people who are kind of willing to sit in that discomfort with you, and they're not
Right.
looking for easy answers. You know,
Yep.
they're not trying to give you those easy answers, but they're just kind of sitting with you. And so I think that like history gives us an in for that. You know, like
Right.
I may not have experienced those things, but I've read about them
Mm-hmm.
and I've tried to have a greater understanding. And so now that just gives me a new layer of
Right.
understanding and a new layer that I can hopefully bring into the work that I do, into the relationships that I have, into the children that I parent. You know,
Right.
all of those things, they might not be my experiences, but I've educated myself. So now they can still benefit me in the way that I am moving through the world, you know?
Right. And you know what? Like even thinking about that context and having that context, it's useful even in the world of marketing and
Yeah,
branding as well,
for
right? Like
sure.
we spend all this time and we spend all this money trying to understand how do we talk to people? Where, at
Yeah.
what points are they going to be receptive to receiving our marketing ads? The Super Bowl just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And, they're trying to penetrate into all these households. They're trying to penetrate into all these people's minds and stuff. But a brand that really can dig in
Right.
in my understanding is when they understand a person holistically. And what that looks like
Yes.
is not starting in 2024,
Right.
not even starting in 2023. If you're going to understand a person
Yeah.
holistically, you have to understand the things in their lives that's impacted their mindset, their attitudes, and their decision making, which goes back to
Yes.
history. You can't start
Yes.
it
It
today.
always goes back to history.
It goes back to history
Yeah.
because there are people who they trust who are pouring into their lives, who are pouring into their sphere of influence. And so you got to understand those things so that you can now become
Yes.
a part of that. Very
Yes.
powerful.
100%.
Very, very powerful. Okay. So to that end, like, let's talk about like, what are some of the, things that you can do to help support like and efforts towards advocacy, anti-racist efforts, so that it's not overshadowing voices and experiences of the marginalized communities and especially Black communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we've talked about, I feel like the best thing we can do is to give ourselves an education. Like I look at it as giving myself the education that I didn't get in school. You know, like it's my responsibility to kind of pick up where that
Mm-hmm.
left off. And I think that that is that's the first step because then
Yeah.
my heart is softened, my understanding is greater. And so I think that that's key. But then I think being open to new perspectives, being open to new viewpoints. Like I'll say sometimes, you know, listening to somebody isn't agreeing with them. So to
Right.
learn how to like advocate for people, we actually have to really understand like a wide
Yeah.
array of perspectives. And I think sometimes we get stuck that, you know, like if I listen to this person, if I read this book, if I, you know, maybe follow this person on social media, it's like saying that I agree with everything that they're saying. And I don't
Yep.
know if I agree. And
That's
that's
true.
not the case. Like just listening is not necessarily like the stamp of, you know, like I
Approval.
approve
Yeah.
everything that you're saying and everything that you believe. But I feel like that advocacy starts with widening that perspective. And so you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to listen to voices that aren't like yours and people that have had experiences that are not yours. And then I think
Mm-hmm.
from there, you know, it's just really understanding what's needed in the moment, which is really more of an art than a science, you know. I
Yes.
can't speak for you. Like I can't speak for your experiences. You can't speak for all Black people and all Black people's
Right.
experiences. Like you've said that, you know, before.
Yep.
We can't speak for each other, but what I can do is like lend my voice, you know, if we're in a situation where you're not present, you know, and there's a situation that's come up and there's
Oh, that's so
discussions
good.
happening. I can lend my voice to that. And I think that I can say, actually, what if we thought about it like this, you know?
That's so
And I
good.
have said before, I've said, like, I can't speak for any Black people that are not in
Yeah.
the room right now. Like, I can't
Yep.
speak for them. I can say that this might be a different perspective that we should consider.
Yep.
So I think at the end of the day, like, I feel like it's just us learning to be human, learning to be kind to each other, learning to, be our brother's keeper, to look out for each other,
Yeah.
to take care of each other. And that doesn't require me coming in and saving anybody. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
require, me being the hero in any way. It's just like, how do I support, other humans, and what does that look
Yep.
like? So
That's so good. Ooh, that's so good. I love that. No, because we get the question a lot of times in some of our workshops to say, like, all right, well, how can I, what do I do? Especially when it comes to a topic that we discuss a lot, which is
yeah,
microaggressions. We're not going to get in that today. We'll save that for
yeah,
another
it's
podcast.
another
But that
episode.
is, it's another episode, but that is a
Yeah,
question that comes up. Like, when I see something happening, what do I do? And you just said it, like,
right.
I can't speak for everybody, but I can lend my voice to this moment. And
Yeah,
that's how you address it, head on and in the moment.
yeah.
So we'll speak to that later. Okay. So you talked about, educating yourself. What are some things that you did, like books that you read, podcasts that you follow? Like, can you give our listeners some resources?
Yeah. So I've talked a little bit about social media, and I actually think that was a huge part of my like educating myself. Was I just started following so many different people on social media. My algorithm was so confused for a while. Like when I was getting ads, it was like, I don't know who you are. I don't know what your ethnicity is. Like they were trying to pin me down because I followed so many people that had, different political viewpoints, like different, from different backgrounds, different ethnicities. And so I think that that was a big part because then kind of in my day-to-day, life, I was like seeing real like events happen in real time. And then I was seeing the reactions from different groups of people and how different people responded. And so I feel like, and that was me like getting some proximity to people that were different from me without like being awkward, right? Without just going up to somebody and saying, what do you think about this? Or, that was kind of like getting the behind the scenes conversation without
Yep.
really being intrusive. So I feel like that was key. But, I'm also a reader. I love to read.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there were some books that were really pivotal for me during
Give me
this
two,
journey.
two books.
Okay. Okay. Just Mercy. I was like, no, you're killing me with the two. Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. I
That's a
read that
good
book
one.
multiple times, and I don't say this about many books, even though I read a lot and I love them. Like that book changed my life. There's
Hmm.
a movie, it's
There's a
pretty good.
movie.
There's a
I
movie
haven't
in
read the
case you're
book,
not a
but the
reader.
movie
Yeah.
is
Okay.
good.
The movie's good. Michael B. Jordan. Yes. So that story, and that's, based on Brian Stevenson's life and his work. And it was just incredibly impactful to me. And the work that he does with the Equal Justice Initiative is something that I follow closely. And so Just Mercy, like that always makes it to the top of my list when somebody's saying like, what should I read? That's the one. And then, I love the book. I mean, I love it for what I learned from it. It's a hard read. It's a difficult read, but The Devil in the Grove by Gilbert
Mm,
King is the
yeah.
book that talks about the Groveland Four case and Thurgood Marshall. And that book came out probably like about 10 years ago. And that's really
Mm-hmm.
how I got like a deep dive of an education on that subject. But the way that Gilbert King writes about history, you're like, is this like a Netflix special? Like
Mm.
he's just
Wow.
making it come to life. And you're just like, this is like kind of hard to believe. So that's another one that I recommend to people a lot. That one's a little bit dense, and it's
Yeah.
tough subject matter, but
Yeah.
it's extremely well written. It won a Pulitzer
Mm-hmm.
Prize, and Gilbert
Wow.
King like did his homework for that book, and
Wow.
so there's just so much that we can learn. So those are two of my very favorites that I've read, more than
Okay.
once, and that
All
I
right.
recommend a lot.
And then give me two social media profiles that we could potentially
Oh, okay. So
recommend.
you know, um, there is a woman that I really enjoy following, Austin Channing Brown, and she also wrote a book, and I read her book. But I feel like just as as a woman, like I connect to hearing her story, and I think Austin is a person of faith, and but she holds that with a lot of nuance and, you know, a lot of honesty. And so I've learned a lot from following her. Um, and she's challenged me a lot, and she said some things
Okay.
that made me extremely uncomfortable, and then I just had to
Yeah.
say, oh, why is that making me uncomfortable right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other one that I just really love is Latasha Morrison, is somebody that I've followed
She's so
for
good.
years. And, you know, she has the organization Be the Bridge. And
Yep.
she's brilliant, and she's kind, and just has so many incredible thoughts. And
Yeah.
her perspective on things, I feel like, is always really helpful for me. So those are two that kind of, you know, stand out as people that I've learned a lot just from following
Yeah.
on social media, just from, you know, reading whatever they release.
Yeah. The two things that you just mentioned is that really impacted me was you don't like she challenged you, Austin
Yeah.
challenged you, but you don't have to agree with
Yeah.
everything that is said. Like
Yeah.
if there's a challenge, lean into the challenge and try to understand, all right, what is it about that that's really challenging me?
Yes.
I know I'm doing that right now in this political season.
Yeah.
I'm listening to everybody and I don't
Right.
necessarily agree with a lot of people, but I want to
Yeah.
hear so that I can understand where are they coming from in this position.
Yes.
I'm really leaning into where the conflict is coming from, why it exists,
Right.
and examining, all right, now what do I do with that now?
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned that. And
Yeah.
then secondly, Latasha Morrison, I read that book, Be the Bridge,
Yeah.
and I felt so seen.
Yeah.
She's wonderful. So I'm just agreeing with you. Shout out to
Yeah.
Latasha Morrison because that book is a powerful one
Yeah. She
to
is. And
read.
she's active on social media. And, you know, you can follow her personally, you can follow her organization. So yeah,
Yes,
there's a lot to learn there. She has a podcast
amazing.
too.
Okay,
Yeah. So
got to check out our podcast.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, Heidi, is there any other? Are there any other gems that you want to drop? Actually, I want to shout you out before you drop your gems. I want to shout you out because when I moved to Florida, we moved here about 7 years ago, and I realized it was like a sobering moment when I realized
Yeah.
where exactly we moved to. And it was like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, Trayvon Martin lived over here. Wait a
Yeah.
minute, wait a minute, what did we just get ourselves into?
Florida is
And that was,
complicated.
yeah, yes, it's a beautiful city. Florida,
Yes.
it's a beautiful state.
Yeah.
But it was complicated. And I had some real realities that I had to consider when it came to raising our children down here. And so when
Yeah.
those realities were hitting me head on, I, at the time, was having some real moments of clarity. And I went
Yeah.
to social media, and there weren't a lot of people that I knew here, but you and I had just briefly met, and
Yeah.
you really came to uh, my rescue is strong, but you made me feel seen, and
Right.
you made me feel like I'm not alone in this. I felt like
Yeah.
without really knowing me well at that point, you got in with me. Like you just
Yeah.
via social media,
That's
you got into the depths of it with me. And just to show the impact of that, hey, everybody, here we are. Like
yeah.
Heidi's
Yeah.
doing that brought us into the relationship that we currently have to the place where we're working together right now. So
Yeah.
shout out to you for that
You're very
and for
sweet. That's
taking
very
the
kind.
step and educating yourself and
Yeah.
becoming a friend and becoming an advocate to where we are right now. I just want to appreciate you and
Well,
shout you out.
thank you for saying that. And, you know, I love you. I love your family. And, you know, it's been just really special to, you know, get to know each other and have a friendship and now get to work together, which is
Yes,
amazing. So, yeah, I mean, I
it's
think
awesome.
just to that end, like, what it's so easy to kind of stay guarded and to stay in our own circle and in our own, you know, world. That's probably the easier path. But I think like what I've learned through being open to Black history, being open to different perspectives, being open to people that have backgrounds and experiences that are completely different than mine, like the things that I've learned and the way that it's opened up my world has been so worth the discomfort, you know? And so I
Hmm.
think that's probably what I would want to leave people with is, you know, it's worth it. It's not easy to kind of take a hard look at what's happening around us. It's not easy to listen to things that make us uncomfortable, or, to hear perspectives that are maybe just different than what we know.
Yeah.
It's not always comfortable. And really, like, it's not comfortable to be in a relationship with people where you aren't in full agreement. And that's something that we
Right.
see so many times today, is people just gravitate towards people that they have full agreement with
Yeah.
on every issue.
It's
And
true.
so, I don't think that's the best way to go about life, honestly.
Right.
So I feel like, as much as, there's like an embracing of discomfort and an embracing of not easy answers and nuance, I feel like the payoff in life has been so rich and so beautiful and so worth it, to just
Wow.
kind of push through that. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you
Yeah.
for your
Thanks for
time.
having
Thank you for
me.
joining us. And listen, everybody, that wraps up our episode 1 of Tag Your
Episode
It.
one. Yeah.
Again, Heidi, grateful to have you sharing your invaluable perspective. And really, honestly, everybody, it's conversations like this that really, truly embody our mission when it comes to the
Yeah.
advocacy group. And so we're grateful that you all tuned in with us. And don't forget to follow us on your
Yep.
favorite podcast platform. And also including YouTube. And if you want to learn more about Black History Month, or even, Black History for White people, we have a seminar
Yeah.
coming up, and it will be led by none other than Miss Heidi herself. So just stay posted with us. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube, and we'll look forward to see you in the next one.
Yeah. Thanks so
Peace.
much.